as you feel moved, you can unmute or raise your hand and talk. Susan, yes, go ahead.
So something that you said just now that resonated with me was, you said surrender to being breathed. And I thought, wow, I spend so much time like counting my breath or inhaling deeply or focusing on breathing in and breathing out and trying to relax my mind. And then if I just stop all of that and just surrender to letting the breath come and go, I found that my breath was so much more shallow. It was like very gentle. It was a very different experience. So that's something I think I can work on this week. I don't know if other people had that experience.
Great. That's great. That's exactly what I would like you to experience, that shift. It's just after being in so many years in Buddhism, there's this quality where, you know, it's clear in the Dharma that like letting go is where it's at. Um, and yet there's so many practices and there's so much this sense of doing something to yourself, that what practice means is doing something to yourself. And unfortunately, I think that, we become all busy about that. And this is just an invitation to let the practice work on you. Let something work on you. I think that's true of this topic in general. Tenderness. I mean, you can intend that. You can certainly try that. Um, but I actually think, we are tender, and what we really need to do is to relax all the things that are, all the barriers we have up to what we actually are. That at our core, what awareness is something very tender. So tender that it takes the shape of whatever is present to it. It becomes everything that it knows. It's the most amazing thing about awareness. It literally becomes the things that are in its field. And there's just a great deal of tenderness there. And it does that without anybody asking for it, so to speak. We do have this sort of more controlled thing about attention. But awareness itself, which to me is, not exactly attention, it's this whole field, it is a very tender thing. And so much of practice is trying to trick you almost into not doing the things that separate you from what you are, as this tenderness, as this ability to be touched so deeply by life, and I spoke about this last week, I believe, but being with she's now 6 months old tomorrow, Lucy. Just watching what goes through her face in just 10 seconds, there's so little resistance. She has not yet developed the neurology, even in some way, to not be tender, not be this full of feeling as she is. So it's like, when we practice in this way, we're kind of like rolling it back a bit to that level of sensitivity, feeling. Okay, I guess I just had another spontaneous Dharma talk there. So who else would like to speak? Who else has a comment? I might add the difference between us and Lucy. It's a lot of life experience. It takes a lot of wisdom to be tender. It's not just, going back to being an infant. Because there's a lot of suffering to being an infant, I have to say. A lot of not being able to skillfully surf all of these things that are going through you. So Okay, I think I'm stopping this little talk now. All right. Anyone else like to speak? Like to just share? What touched you? Virginia.
Um, well, I'm sitting here listening and I think I would like to succeed at tenderness.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm not even sure really what that would mean for me or what it would really, one of the only times I can relate to it is when I'm like sitting somewhere and thinking about my sister. Um, and I feel very loving and sensitive, probably I would say tender.
Hmm.
But in my day-to-day life, just all the activity and everything, the way that I think about myself, the word tenderness it's just not there.
Hmm.
And I,
What
I-
is there in you when you think about yourself?
um, well, I mean, I will admit that it's very easy for me to think about the things that I um, believe about myself that are more on I mean, these words are too strong, I will admit that, but more like overbearing,
Hmm.
harsh,
Hmm.
opinionated, I mean,
Hmm.
like uh, just like those kinds of feelings about myself. Um, and but I will say this, that I have noticed a couple times that when I'm sitting, I have finally started to catch up to these thoughts that I have that I don't like to have. Maybe they're judgmental, maybe they're whatever. And I think to myself in that moment about my mind just being the sky. And right then I remember to let everything just go. And that that is like a really um, to even have experienced that in so many years of practice, a little bit really feels amazing to me. Um, and I do aspire to playing that catch up more in my daily life, not just my sitting life. But anyway,
All right. Well, thank you for giving me the picture of what you're talking about. It's very
yeah.
helpful, and I'm glad that you're having these moments where the mind is the sky, rather than being just the opinions that are going through your head or the thoughts that are going through your head.
Hmm.
And notice the feeling of that. There's a feeling to it, and I think you like it. It's a good feeling. It's a wholesome feeling. It's you're drawn to it,
Hmm.
you know. So that's all I would add at those moments when you do notice it, is just notice the feeling of it. And in the feeling of it, there is tenderness. When you open to feeling, um, there it is. You don't have
Hmm.
to try too hard. Um, I was really struck by the words you used when you started about wanting to succeed at tenderness. It's sort of like, there's there's this striving energy it's almost incompatible with it. But it's funny because that's how we are. You know, we hear that, oh, I should be tender, and we, you know, something in us, the doer, like wants to know how to do that, and um, and I think that's part of what we suffer from. So, you know, one of the phrases you could try too, um, in some ways, I just keep doing what you're doing. I think it's great. I think like just be the sky once in a while with your thoughts. The other thing that I've sometimes found helpful is to just say, this is suffering once in a while to all of those thoughts. And
Mm.
even the judgments about yourself that you think you're overbearing or harsh, you know, um, we're all that way once in a while. Some just maybe more often than others. But there's more to you than that. I'm quite confident. And so, you know, succeeding at tenderness, it looks like this. It looks like just letting something touch you in your day. Let something touch you in your day. Your sister, great. You've got a thing there that works consistently. You must feel affection for her. And so that opens you to that. But, you know, it's springtime. Are you ever touched by like flowers?
Sure.
Okay, there you go. Let a flower into your heart. You know, stop. It takes some time. You just stop, let it touch you. You know, an animal, wild or domestic, let it touch you. The sky, the blueness of the sky, or the clouds in the sky, or the sun breaking through the clouds in the sky. Let it touch you. It's that simple, you know? And it's not like how can I put this? You know, what our egos want to do is they want to put something on our mental resume, you know? I am a, I am a tender person. I have succeeded at happiness. I have succeeded at tenderness. It likes to do that. It likes to create these kinds of overarching kind of narratives. Um, and then they all fall apart and they go, you know, and the ego's back and I'm miserable. I'm no good. You know, all of that. And so now being touched is kind of just completely out of that loop. You know, I think this may be shocking, but you know, even somebody who's done some horrendous things in their life, who we might think of as morally bad, might have a moment where they're touched by the beauty of their child, for example, or they're touched by the beauty of a flower. That capacity is never erased to be touched by something. And it's perhaps the sadness of certain kinds of pathologies that people don't seem to be very touchable. Um, you know, they may be too absorbed in a certain kind of narcissism. They can't be touched very easily. But I think even them, occasionally, something might sneak through. Something might sneak through their incredibly thick defenses and touch them. So that's all by way of saying, Virginia, don't make it harder than it is. It's really, you know, go through the week and see what you can let touch you. Nancy.
Yeah, hi. So something that resonated for me this week, you had suggested it was something we might sit with, and that was the vulnerability of the planning mind.
Yes.
And so I wrote that on a card and I put it next to my computer. So I saw it like, 30 times. And each time it did something to me. I'm when I have intrusive thoughts or any, thoughts during meditation, like 99.9% is planning. Um, could be, what I'm going to do as soon as I get up, or it could be more, more long term or whatever, but it's planning. And yeah, something about that reflection, it almost like brings tears to my eyes. And I don't feel like I got to the bottom of it. Like, um, what's under all that planning, like fear comes to mind, but fear of what? Fear that what terrible thing would happen, or, so yeah, so it's just interesting because I usually actually see that as kind of a strength that I have, like I've got all these things and I'm able to da da da, and I'm very organized, and this just turned that on its head. So I guess I'm not done with it because I'm not sure like what the tears are about.
There you go. That's where to stay. And it's not going to come by thinking about them.
Mm.
You know, whatever you, all you know is it softened your heart somehow
Yeah.
in that moment. And like something inside you, like was waiting to be recognized.
Mm. Mm.
And and you don't have to analyze it further, I don't think. Just keep that connection going of like the recognition. This is hard. I'm like you. I have a lot of pride in my executive functioning, and and there's a burden there.
Mm.
You know, there's a part of our mind that has taken on this burden of I'm gonna I'm gonna get Mark through his day, and I'm gonna get all the things done that need to get done, and I'm gonna something has taken that task on out of love for myself, but there's a burden there. You know, it's not entirely comfortable. And so the word vulnerability was kind of pointing to that. So I'm really glad you took it on, Nancy, and that you
Yeah.
spoke about it. And I have to think, you mentioned that you're retiring. I would have to think that planning might be an overdrive in some ways as you near the end of your time there, and there are loose ends to tie up, and and different kinds of connections to be made. And so good luck. I think it's very rich.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Yeah, if I can simplify, what we're doing in this class, it was helpful talking with Virginia just to say, just notice what touches you as you go through your day. That's really the simplest way to get to the tenderness. Notice the being touched, and what touches you, and notice the being touched. Um, it's very simple, especially if anybody can speak to the breathing that we did. I'd be curious to hear other people's words for that experience. Jennifer.
Yeah, you spoke about your experience and development with breathing over the last many decades. And when I think about it, I mostly think about it as a rhythm and an inhale and an exhale. So I wonder if you could explain further how that developed for you and what it feels like, or um,
Particularly the rhythm of the breath, or
well, you said that it sounded like you said there was a lot of depth to what you've gained and learned about breathing over the last 40 years.
yeah, just say more is basically what you're
Yeah,
saying.
say more.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is that the breath is a mirror of our nervous system and our state. It reflects in a very honest way who we are and what we're being in any moment. And I think that's a big reason why it's so frequently chosen as the object of meditation, is because it is tied so deeply to the state that we're in. And that's not obvious right at the beginning. I don't think when you first start to practice how deeply your breath is tied in. I think it came to me more doing some intensive silent retreats and beginning to feel what the breath feels like when there's, when the tension is really gone from the body. I realized I didn't really even know what that was. I didn't know what an unimpeded breath was until I started to meditate in a certain way. I didn't know how much of the controlling of myself too was tied up in the breath. One of the things that I had to work through with the breath is controlling the breath. Became very aware how much I control the breath. And that was just a perfect reflection of how much I controlled myself, how kind of tight the wires were, how cinched down things were inside of me. And again, I think when I first started meditating, I didn't notice that I was controlling my breath. It was only later that I really started to see that more clearly. And then there was a certain kind of aversion to that and feeling like there was something wrong with controlling my breath and trying not to control my breath, which is just a different way of trying to control your breath. And so the breath became a kind of koan. You know that word that, in the Zen tradition, a koan, they have these sort of little proverbs that you're given that they don't make a lot of conceptual sense. Like, what is the sound of one hand clapping is like a classic Zen koan. And so the student is like given this to work on, and you go back to your teacher and, express your understanding of the koan, and they either, pass you on it or you flunk and you're sent back with the koan to work with it longer. And you can imagine this whole thing creates a lot of tension. And that's how Zen works. It creates a lot of tension with the idea that at some point you're going to break through and you're going to actually experience what it's like to let go of all of that stuff. I haven't done Zen practice much, but it's kind of ingenious that way. So anyway, the breath for me became like that koan, like what is the sound of one hand clapping? And like the koan was, what would it be to not control my breath? And my mind kind of went up and down and around all sorts of things. And the thing that I actually landed on with some help from teachers was, it's okay to be controlling your breath. Stop trying to not control your breath. Just notice that it's happening. And at the same time, notice that it's happening. Let it be okay. So kind of backing off from any sense that I wasn't supposed to control the breath, and backing off from any sense that that was a hindrance or that was a problem. Instead, it was just what was. And in that, I feel like I finally began to let me, you can use that word, be touched by, let my heart be touched by who Mark Hart is, that he's got to control himself so much. It's sort of like when I was trying to engineer a better experience, I could avoid all that. But when I stopped trying to engineer a different experience than controlling my breath, I started to see myself more clearly. I started to feel compassion for who I was. And it was that I think started to break through in some way this control that I was operating under. And eventually, without me trying, I stopped controlling the breath. Once in a while, it still happens again. And it's sort of like the sky is blue, I'm controlling my breath. Big deal, you know. But I think the powerful thing was the way the breath, just something so concrete, it couldn't be falsified because that's just the nature of the breath. It's so honest. It's so honest. And so when you're afraid, the breath changes. When you're ashamed, the breath changes. When you're like in a desirous state, the breath changes. When you're in a joyful state, the breath changes. It reflects back all of these different kind of states to you with a great deal of honesty and clarity. So that's sort of one thing I could say about breathing. And what else? In terms of what all is in the breath.
Does it have to do with the rhythm or the
rhythm of the
inhale
breath,
and the exhale?
Yeah, I mean, if you go into the yogic tradition, there's a lot of stuff about breathing, and there are patterns that are taught to you. And so one of the fundamental patterns is to breathe out longer than you breathe in as a relaxation pattern.
Mm-hmm.
So if you ever just want to relax,
Mm-hmm.
count like 4 breaths in and 8 breaths out,
Mm-hmm.
and do that for a while. So yes, it's about the rhythm. And so in that sort of pranayama tradition, they've like hacked into these patterns that the breath naturally has related to certain states of mind. And you deliberately kind of able to enter into these states by working with your breath. But they're also very much about control. Pranayama is about controlling the breath and making it do something to give you a certain result, a certain kind of state that arises out of that. I've done some pranayama. It's interesting stuff. And you can do it and get all kind of worked up, take on a lot of energy, or be very relaxed. You can take it in a lot of different directions. But I think there was something fortunate in that I kind of landed in Buddhism first, and was presented with the challenge of not controlling the breath, because I think controlling the breath is something I would have been really good at if someone had made that the practice. If someone had made that the practice, I would have like mastered pranayama. But it wouldn't have been freedom. It wouldn't have been liberation. Because liberation is that kind of untying the knot. Virginia actually was pointing to that in those moments where, there's all this kind of identification with opinions or whatever. And then like the mind just notices the skylight nature of mind, and something like dissolves. You feel that kind of release. There's a release. So I think I could have been really good at pranayama and not necessarily have experienced release, not necessarily have experienced liberation or freedom, what that is. So I've found the breath is really powerful. I worked, for much of the time in the prior century, sounds funny to say, for those first 20 years of my practice, I was very drawn to the Thai forest tradition, which is very much based on mindfulness of breathing as the core practice that's taught. In other traditions, like the Burmese tradition, mindfulness of breathing is just thought of as a concentration practice that gets you then to some of these other practices that they want to do. They want to get your mind steady and calm. Okay, it's steady and calm. Now let's go on to what we want to do. But in the Thai forest tradition, the breath is the whole practice. And so you work with the breath in various ways around, the coming and going of things, the arising and passing of things is right there in the breath, in each breath. And you can go to a deep level of insight and feeling about the ending of the breath. Because the ending of the breath is exactly like everything else in life. It ends and it's gone.
Mm-hmm.
So the breath can become a kind of access to, like, touching the way that every moment of being is like gone almost as soon as you notice it. So that's another way the breath. I've worked with the breath. It's been very powerful. I think more I can say about breathing, about how it's been. I guess, I'll just go back to what I already said earlier. That is about joy has been really important for me. Coming to that, because I worked really hard in the 80s and 90s as a Buddhist. I was a hardworking Buddhist, and so I did all the things with the breath, all the noticing kinds of things with the non-controlling of breathing. That is so much about Theravada practice. But as somehow I've come home to, as I meditate, it's like the joy, some kind of joy in just the being of breathing, which is where I want to rest. So that's kind of where I am these days.
That's lovely. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Thanks for asking the question, giving me the opportunity to realize what I might have to say about it. Okay, so we're at our time for tonight. Everybody, be well and notice what touches you this week and notice what it's like to be touched. Okay, be well.